In this video, we'll set up the render for our 4 crumbling scene. So let's open that scene file and get started with this one. So here we are in our 4 crumble scene, and let's just make these 2 bits of geometry invisible so we can actually see what's happening. So what we've got here, if you remember, is a 3 and a 4, and they're crumbling down with a really nice dust animation, which is exposure effects. And the reason that we've got a 3 and a 4 is because we're going to use the 3. It's not going to be visible. It's going to be quite a kind of very dark black, but we're using it to hide the actual number 3 that will be revealed once this crumbles away. So that's looking good. And remember that we put these additional cracks in here for a bit more interest. And it's those that I want to draw your attention to before we move on to the actual rendering stage. So what we are going to do is we're going to just add a little bit more animation to this scene before we start rendering it. And we're doing that for a very important reason. If you remember, our 5 wrap is being burnt away from our fire that starts here and burns its way across, revealing the number 4. But that's going to be the only animation in the scene. The 4 isn't actually animating at all, and it's going to look a little static. So we need something of interest to happen whilst that fire is moving its way across. But it's actually a very easy thing for us to do. So let's work on that. It'll just take about 5 minutes, and then we'll recache, and then we'll be ready to start the render proper. So we're going to need about 1 second's worth of kind of supplementary animation here to make this look better. So let's get that sorted. Just a quick reminder of what we've got here. So we have one shatter object that has our number 4 geometry in. We have another shatter object that has our number 3 geometry in. Both shatter objects have an XP dynamics tag, and what this is doing, it's spawning particles onto the vertices of each shatter object, and those particles are reacting with all of our modifiers, with our gravity and with our explode, to make them fall downwards. Okay? So what we need to do is offset some things. So let's just, for the time being, so we get quick playback, let's deactivate exposure effects. Let's deactivate the cache. So now this is playing and calculating live. And what we want to do is 2 things. We want this animation of the collapse to start later, and we want something to happen in the meantime. So let's do the animation of the collapse first. Now this is working via an explode modifier with this spherical field is animating along this spline path. Let's have a look. See it animating along? And wherever this explode spherical field is, if a particle goes in it, it pushes it forwards, and then the gravity pulls it down. So what we need to do is stop this animation and start it 30 frames later. So let's go to our follow spline tag, and we can see, look, here are our keyframes. So it starts on frame 3 and finishes on frame 50. So we need to offset that by 30 frames. So let's just put some more frames in the timeline. Let's select those keyframes, and let's just drag them forward to frame 50, 1, 2, 3. So now that animation starts slightly later. So the first ones have still gone though, haven't they? Can you see that? They've still gone, and then they've all fallen. Now they've all fallen because they're actually all attached via our constraints. So we haven't quite got this right yet. What we need to do is switch off that explode, which starts off that initial animation, and then switch it back on around here. So let's go to frame 53. Let's go to our... Actually, look, we've moved that too far, haven't we? I moved it to 50. We only want 30 frames. So let's move that to 33. So 1, 2, 3. My mistake. So at frame 33, let's go to our explode mod, to the basic tab, and keyframe enabled. Let's go back a frame to 32 and disable it. So now if we hit play, nothing happens, and then it starts offset at frame 33. Perfect. Right, so we've got our delayed animation. Now what we want to do is add a little bit of interest in this first 30 frames. And this is how we're going to do it. First of all, we're going to go to our 4 shatter. And I think these gaps are going to be quite an interesting part because they're going to reveal some of the inner colour, of a different colour on the inside. And we got these gaps by adjusting the offset value in Shatter. So let's put that up. Let's say like 1. Oh, that's a much, much thicker gap. That's going to look really interesting, I think. Perhaps doesn't need to be. Yeah, no, go on, look. We'll leave it at that. Let's be bold. Right. So now what we want to do is this. These 2 shatter objects, the 3 and the 4, are being shattered by this Voronoi shatter layer. And it is a spline, our number 3 spline, which is dictating how these shards are created. So if I get my 3 shatter spline, and I move this, look what happens. Interesting. So let's hit undo. What you could also do is move it in the Z, and we get a different look. So that's really interesting, isn't it? But remember, our fire is moving from the bottom to the top. So this would be good if we had a bit of animation that moved like this. Okay, so let's go to frame 32. Let's go to our spline 3 shatter to the coordinates and let's hit a Y keyframe. Let's go to frame 0, bring this down. There we go. A bit further maybe, something like that. Hit a keyframe. So now we have our supplemental animation. Now can you see something happening here? We're getting these, every now and again, we're getting these odd, looks like kind of shading problems. Now the reason that is happening is this. We have got our shatter. So as this spline is moving, the shatter is changing the vertices on our objects, which is fine. But we've also got a dynamics tag on here. And in our dynamics tags, yes, look, we have update points selected. So update points means that the dynamics tag is altering the position of those individual points. And we don't need this. The reason this is here is if you want your XP dynamics on an object to make it look like a soft body, so the vertices don't always stay in the same position in relation to themselves, they squash in and out. So if we just deselect these update points and then play, you'll see, there we go, we've got that perfect animation, none of those issues. Perfect. That's looking really, really cool. Excellent. Right, so that's it. Very quick. All we need to do now is recache that. So let's just reactivate our cache. Let's reactivate our explosion. Let's go to the cache object. Let's go to build cache, overwrite, and there it goes. So I'll pause this now, come back when it's finished, and we'll get on with the render setup. Okay, so that's finished caching. So now look, we have our initial animation, and then leads into our collapse with our nice smoke dust simulation. Fantastic. So we're in a good place. That's worth it. And I think it's when we get to the final comp stage and we see how this 4 gets revealed, it's going to be definitely feel worth it to have this additional kind of supplemental animation in there. Great. So let's get set up for render now then. So what we'll do is, let's just tidy up this scene a bit. We will put this 3 reveal collider object in the other objects. And just actually while we're here, I know we're not going to be rendering this. It was just there as a collision object. Let's just hide that from the render. We don't need to see that. In fact, it's cached now. We can switch it off. Let's take our 2 splines, put those inside there as well, just so everything is tidy. All right, looking good. Excellent. So let's create a new render area for this crumble scene. Then let's go File, Save As. And we want to go to MoGraph Countdown. Let's go to Render Builds. Let's make a new folder. It's going to be XP Countdown for crumble. Okay, got a B in there instead of an N. Let's change that. There we go. All right. Go in there. And let's hit save. Perfect, we're in the right place. So what do we need? We need to bring in our scene elements, which are our lights and our cameras. So let's go to File, Open, and we can pick our, well, one of these. Let's go to our combined render settings, open that up. Here's my scene objects. There it is, cameras and lights. That's all we need. Let's hit Control C. Let's go to Window, back to our 4 crumble, paste those in. Great. So let's go to our scene camera. Just hide that camera. All right. So let's have a look at what we've got. We'll go to our Cycles 4D layout. Let's hit play. And there we go. So what do we need to do here? Well, what we want is our 3 isn't actually supposed to be visible. It's certainly not at the start. It's just here to block out the actual 3 that this crumble will be revealing. So what we need to do, we're just going to put a diffuse black texture on without any specular, which will effectively hide it. So let's do that. We'll go to Create, Cycles 4D. This is in the Material Manager. And we will go with Surface, and just a diffuse will do. Let's pick a diffuse, and let's go to the color and just make it black. Let's change the name of this texture to 3 and put it on our 3 object. And now you can see, look, disappeared in the viewport. Great. And we'll just leave it there for now. There's more to do, but we'll leave it there for now. Let's make another one. Create. Let's go with Cycles 4D. Let's go Surface, and we'll do a principled BSDF. So this is going to be the outside of our number 4. And all we're going to do, we're going to keep our specular on 0.5, keep everything as bog standard default, but the base color, we're going to give it more towards green than blue, really. Something along those lines. Let's rename this one and call it 4. Stick it on our number 4. Okay, good. So what else do we need to do? What we need is the inside. So remember, what we're going to do is we're going to have the inside of our shattered objects are going to be the same color as the 3 sand particles that they're revealing. And we want those to be an orange color. And we're going to do this all in the same node. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit Control, copy that principled node, principled BSDF, open it up, go to the color, and this is going to be more of an orange, something along those lines. And then what I want to do with these is I want this only to be on the inside. So what we want to do is mix together these 2 nodes. And we're going to do that with a mix node. So we'll go to right click, shader, mix shader. Let's put this one in the bottom. Let's put this one in the top. Okay. And then we'll put the output into the surface. So what we're going to get is kind of just a muddy mix of the 2. If I move this factor all the way to the left, we've got the greeny color. All the way to the right, we've got the orange color. So this is what we're going to do. Do you remember that we made sure in the XP Shatter 4, in the Selection tab, before we cached, we clicked Inner Faces and Outer Faces, which gives us this selection tag. Well, we can use this to define how those colors are mixed. So let's take the Inner Faces one and bring it into our node editor, and it brings in an attribute. And if I hit color to solo this attribute, you will see that the inside of the 4 is white and the outside is black. So then if we take this colour and pipe it into the factor, we're getting what we want. We're getting the inside to be orange and the outside to be the nice kind of green colour. Perfect. So let's do the same to our black one. So the number 3 is black on the outside but orange on the inside. So let's take these two nodes. So I've highlighted this bottom principled node and the mix shader, hit Control and C to copy it. Let's go into our 3 material, hit Control V. All right, and then our black one will stick on the top. We'll put the shader into the surface, and now it's a mix of the two. So then we need to go to our 3 shatter, take our inner faces selection, make an attribute node out of it, and use the color of that to mix those nodes. Excellent. And if we move forward, so here we've got our animation. Cool. And there we go. Very, very cool. Okay, so that's looking good. The last thing we need to do is sort out our exposure effects. So let's just open it up in our dynamics menu here in the object manager, and we'll just go through to a frame where we've got some of this dust. So what do we need for this? Well, we've used some preset materials before, but let's build a very basic smoke material from scratch for this one. So we're going to go to Create, we're going to go to Cycles 4D, let's go to our Volume menu, and at the top we've got a fantastic node called the Principled Volume node. So let's click on that. So what we have is this, and this one node allows us to do smoke and fire all in one, which is great. If we just drag this and stick it on our exposure effects though, we're just getting this smoke look throughout the entire volume. So that's not right. So what we need to do is give it the information that exposure effects has generated, that density information. And we do it the same way using a point density node. So let's go to right click and texture, point density texture, which gives us this. Now this is an important step. With this point density texture, follow my mouse down to the attributes. We need to drag in the exposure effects container into this window or it won't work. So let's bring our exposure effects and drag it in there. Okay, and what we want is, with smoke, we don't want to normalize the output. This is often, it can be useful with fire, but smoke often, majority of the time, you're not going to want to do that. Okay, and we want to select the right output. So by default, it's on particle position, but we want exposure effects, smoke. So let's click on that. And then we're going to take the density from that and put it into the density of our principled volume. And you'll see that we've got a little bit of smoke, but it's looking a little bit too thin. So we need to make it greater. So we do that with a multiply node, and it'll act as a kind of a power slider. So let's right click, let's go to Converter, Math, drop that in. We'll change that from an add, doesn't want to be add, it needs to be a, let's go down here, it needs to be a multiply, and let's multiply it by, I don't know, let's say 30. Oh, that's probably a bit too thick. But straight away you can say, look, we're getting some pretty nice smoke. Now, it's not the right color. We want this smoke to match the inside of our objects, this orange. So let's take that color and let's give it an orange. Something like that to start with. Whoa, that's very orange. So let's just dial that saturation back a bit. There we go. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. Now, another thing that we're able to do is, at the moment, if we just go to our Cycles 4D render settings, let's go to cycle. We're on cycle start here, which was our preset, remember? So if we go to our light paths and ray depth settings here, you can see that we have a volume depth. Let's just put this down to 0. By default, this will be on 0. And what this gives you is, it's a bit like if you imagine the ray bounces for glass, and the more ray bounces, the lighter that glass appears because the light can bounce around inside of it and refract. Well, this is a bit like the volume, same thing for a volume, like volume steps. If you see, it'll get brighter and brighter and more detailed and look nicer the more volume depth you have. But the payoff for that, the hit for that, is that it'll take longer to render. But this is looking really nice. It'll make it feel like the light is penetrating and kind of illuminating from within when you have higher settings in that volume depth. All right. So that's looking pretty interesting. Just play that through. Let's see what we get. So here comes the animation. The boxes fall. Create this dust. Looks good. I mean, it's arguably a little bit too thick, but this is, I mean, look, come on, it's an abstract piece. I think we'll probably get away with that. And it's going to be quite fast moving. So I think we're okay with that. One other thing, last thing to show you actually, which is useful for exposure effects, is this is a relatively low resolution exposure effects simulation. It's not a very small voxel size. For production, we'd want to go a bit lower, and you can kind of see there's just little traces of that. Look, you can see it's a little bit blocky where you can almost see the voxels, and that is going to happen when you've got lower quality renders. But we can fix that to a certain degree by the settings in this point density texture. So if we just if you follow my pointer down to the attribute manager, so we have this interpolation which interpolates the density values in the voxels, and by default it's on linear. If I set this to closest, you're going to see that you can almost see each individual voxel as almost like a cube in the render. You see these? You can see the squares. So obviously that, for us, isn't the look that we want. And if we go to linear, we have a smoother interpolation where it gets rid of the majority of that. Now, if you've got a high-resolution sim, it's good to have it on linear because you get a little bit more kind of defined detail in your sim and you don't see this blockiness. But if you're seeing some blockiness and you're not happy with, you can smooth it out somewhat by choosing the cubic interpolation, which is, see, it's smoothed out that, and now we don't have any of that. Now you lose a feel of some of the detail. That's the downside of cubic. But to mask a low resolution sim, it can often be quite a nice idea. So this is looking pretty nice. Let's just see if we follow this down a little bit. There it goes, out of frame. Let's just try it fractionally less dense. Let's put it on, say, 15. Okay, I think we're going to be in a better place with 15. And there it goes, out of frame to reveal the 3. Fantastic. Okay, so I think we're pretty much there now. Let's have a look. We'll get to the point where it's out of frame, when we know when to stop rendering. So 126, we can cut it. So let's have a look at our settings then. Let's go to the render settings. We'll go to output, and we want, what did we say, 126. So let's put it on manual, 0 to 126, 720p, 30 frames per second. Let's go to save. We want to change the format from TIFF to OpenEXR. Change this down to 16-bit. And let's choose a file path. So what do we want? We want render builds, crumble, let's add a render folder. We'll select this. So we've got our name. Hit render. There we go, it's save. So that's going to be the correct file path. We do want an alpha channel, so we'll have that. And what else do we have? Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's go to our Cycles 4D. Now let's just talk about samples here. We've got 5 maximum ray bounces. We've got a volume depth of 2. And let's just go back. Let's just have a look. Now, with the type of materials that we've made here, fireflies shouldn't be an issue, which they're not. Let's have a look at noise. So we've got 30 samples selected in our real-time preview. My feeling is that we're going to be able to get away with having far fewer than 30. We don't have any kind of reflective materials which can be bad for making noise. Okay, so yeah, we're not going to need this many. Let's put this down to, say, 22. Just go forward 1 frame, so you just get that to re-sim. Let's see how we're looking on 22. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. All right, very good. That's going to do us. Let's go to our integrator and samples menu. Let's change the default 4 samples to 22. Okay. And it looks like we are good to go. Yeah, that's all looking good. Okay. So let's come out of there. Let's save that. And then let's also save as, and we could kind of rename it actually. Let's give that a, just so we know, render settings name. Save. Very good. Okay, so we'll render that to the picture viewer, and once that's finished, we'll have a look at that final render and see how it looks and see how it feels. So here we are in After Effects with our final render. This took just under half an hour and it's looking pretty good. I'm pleased with this. Obviously, we're not at production resolution here, so it would be nice if we had far more shards in our Shatter object, and that would be something that we'll be doing obviously for production level. The more shards, the better this is going to look, and also the we'd have a higher resolution exposure FX scene with a bit more detail in the shadows. But I'm really happy with it, and our bit of kind of initial movement here, this moving of our lines, is going to work fantastically underneath our 5 burn when that kind of gets burnt away. So all in all, this is looking really good. Very pleased with it. Now we're ready to move on and render our last 2 elements. We've got 2 scenes to go. We've got our sand collapse and advection, and then that number 1 volume smoke emission to render. So we'll see you in the next video.